I'm Dennis with Silhouette. Today I want to talk a little bit about some of the large 3D papercraft displays that we've used in some of our events and shows that we've been to throughout the years. I want to talk a little bit today about my process that I use to create these large-scale papercraft models. Specifically talking about the software, some of the tools, a little bit of the construction, but without getting into too much detail. These are just the basics and just talking about the process that I used. So for the 3D modeling software that I use, I like to use Blender. Blender's free, and that's great, but also there are a ton of tutorials on the internet that will teach you how to use it and kind of give you some of the step-by-steps in making it work. And that's important because Blender is a pretty robust program. It can do some pretty amazing things, from 3D animation to 3D artwork, but it also works really well in creating some of these low poly forms that are great for 3D papercraft. And you can see with this one specifically, this was a model that we made for our summit event, and the theme of the year was sea turtles, so I wanted to make a sea turtle that would match the logo and match the theme, and so I went through, and because they're so large, it had to be built in a way that it would hold its structure. And so each one of these little pieces is all broken down and is assembled separately from one another. So in the end, it wouldn't just be a big hollow form, it would be a solid, rigid structure that could support its own weight because of the size. And so I like to use Blender. It has a lot of tools. It has a lot of things that you can use to then export the 3D model. But once you've exported the 3D model, you then have to have a software that will allow you to break it down. And for that, I like to use a program called Pepakura Designer. Pepakura is great for flattening 3D files, but it isn't always great at creating the cleanest 2D file. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to clean up some of them, but also it doesn't apply the correct stroke weight that would be recognized by your Silhouette machine. So there's a little bit of legwork that you still have to do in order to get the file to be ready to send to your Silhouette machine. But as you can see here, like this is sort of the breakdown of what the turtle ended up looking like. There was a lot of support structures that went into it to make it sturdy so that it wouldn't collapse under its own weight. So because I'm a designer, I use Adobe Illustrator for just about everything. So that's what I used to take this 2D file and clean it up and get ready to be cut. If you don't have Illustrator, you can still use Silhouette Studio, but you have to make sure that you have at least Designer Edition in order to be able to use the SVG cut file that you get from Pepakura. But here in Illustrator, you can see I've taken all of the pieces, I've grouped them according to the color that I want to cut them out as, and then I have arranged them in the cutting space so that I am minimizing waste, because there's nothing worse than having a bunch of sheets that you've sent through your machine and you look at the pile at the end and there's mostly paper left. So you want to make sure that you minimize as much waste as you can to get the most out of it, because at this size, with making these kind of models, it does get pretty pricey because you're using so much material. So I've also applied all of the fold lines indicated by the blue line, and that way when I go into Silhouette Studio to cut this out, I can just set each one according to its line color. So when I finished here, I save it out as an SVG, and then I can bring it into Silhouette Studio and basically just make sure that it's in the cutting area, and then go into the send panel, and I can set each cut based on the line color here in the software. And so once I've done all that and I've tweaked my cut settings, then I can go ahead and send it to my Silhouette machine. So that's about it. That's the basics of the software that I use in each one. And like I said, it's not incredibly tidy, but it's effective. And there are different software programs out there that will do similar things to get a similar result. But these are the ones that I use that I found were useful. So now I want to talk a little bit about the construction and some of the physical materials that I use. So when you're building papercraft models of this size, you need to use something a little bit heavier than just basic cardstock. So I actually got just large poster board sheets. They're about 180-pound poster board sheets. That was the most effective. And then at the time, this was before we had the Cameo Pro, so I had to break them all down so that they would fit on the 12 by 24 inch mat. And so then taking each sheet, cutting it down so it was 12 inches wide by however long, and then being able to cut those out. Now if you've got the Cameo Pro, obviously you don't have to cut down nearly as much. You may be able to fit the entire sheet on the mat, so that's awesome. But also you want to use solid core poster board if you can. That's the poster board that's dyed all the way through. If you use just the standard white core poster board, then you're going to get a lot of haloing. You get the white lines through your score lines from the machine. So try to use the solid core stuff. And also you're going to need a lot of glue. And I used a ton of glue for these. And I actually went through and I tested so many different kinds. And the one that worked best for me was, it's Aleene's craft glue, the Fast Grab Tacky Glue is what it's called. I liked it because it was pretty thick. It would really hold, it wouldn't run, and it wouldn't make a big mess. And so it was pretty effective for me. I want to talk a little bit about some of the hard lessons that I learned in making some of these for the events and displays, because there definitely were some. There were some definite heartbreaks. So for this model was used for Maker Faire. We booked a booth at Maker Faire back in 2015, and we wanted something that would fit the aesthetic of the show, but also push the limits a little bit on what you would consider standard use for one of our cutting machines. And so I really wanted to find something that would fit that criteria. And I'd never done anything like this before when I attempted this. And I only had a month to put it together and figure it out. So for some reason, I decided to go with a 4-foot tall robot that was made using over 500 pieces. And so it was pretty crazy. Once we started assembling the thing, I realized quickly that this was not going to stand on its own because it had no internal structure. It was just, even with rigid cardstock, it was still just paper. And so as we started putting it together, it just wanted to buckle and fall and bend and just tear itself apart. And so we ended up having to support it with whatever we could find. We put boxes and machines around it, and it worked. Like, it made it through the show. And then on the return trip, because we'd put it back in that same cardboard box, it didn't survive the trip home. So when we got back, it was basically a total loss, which was too bad because it could have been used for a lot of different things. And so, lesson learned. So this is version 2. I made it with a rigid support structure in the legs. I also weighted the feet. I made plaster molds to weight the feet so that it would stand on its own. And then I also made it using magnets at all the joints so that it could be completely disassembled and then reassembled and packed back up and sent to many different shows. And it's surprisingly, even though it's paper, like, this thing is surprisingly sturdy and robust. I've dropped it several times and you can't even tell. Okay, as you can tell, I'm probably more comfortable making these models than talking about them on camera. But I hope you found this interesting. If there is anything that you'd like to learn more, please leave a comment in the comment section, and we can maybe do a more in-depth tutorial. Maybe not something to this scale, but touching a little bit more on on the details of how to make this stuff. But thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our channel for more video content, and we'll see you next time.